The fire didn't roar at first. It whispered soft, almost polite, as if flames could have manners when they crawl over ivory satin. I remember thinking that the sound was wrong for what I was seeing, that something as small as a flick from a lighter shouldn't be able to undo 6 months of fitting savings and dreams. But it did. The hem curled in on itself like a frightened thing, beating into black. And then the bodice followed bejeweled seams, popping one by one like tiny betrayals I could hear. It smelled like hot sugar and plastic, and the kind of panic you can't swallow. I stood there breathing smoke in the bridal suite of the Cleveland Grand Pavilion, 25 years old. A copywriter who had learned to make miracles out of small budgets and tight deadlines, and I watched my wedding dress die 30 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. Beside me, my three bridesmaids froze mid-breath. In front of me, Jason's mother, Margaret Wilson, all immaculate blowout and manicured disdain, held the lighter with a hand that didn't tremble. "Now you can't marry my son," she said, and the room shrank around her smile. I had always thought fear had a temperature, that when it finally arrived for you it would be ice. But fear was heat that day, radiant, pressing intimate as a hand between the shoulder blades. I could feel it working its way under my skin, but I also felt something else I didn't expect, a tide pulling backward, gathering itself. I thought of every hour I'd worked 2 jobs to put myself through community college. Of the promotions I had earned, not because someone opened a door, but because I learned where the hinges were and brought my own screwdriver. Of the first time Jason kissed me in the parking lot of the agency on a Tuesday that smelled like rain and French fries and the kind of hope that feels ridiculous until it isn't. I wasn't a nobody from the wrong side of town, no matter how precisely Margaret enunciated the words. I had built myself by inches and I wasn't finished. My body knew what to do before my mind did. I reached for my phone with the same calm I used when clients called at 7 p.m. with a disaster and said the ad had to be in print at 8. "You have no idea what you just did." I heard myself say, the tone, not theatrical, not even angry, just steady. The dress sank in on itself with a sigh, like fabric giving up a ghost, and for a heartbeat I existed in 2 timelines, the one in which I crumpled and the one in which I stood. The second one won. I tapped to bring up the event dashboard for the live stream we had set up for Jason's grandparents in Florida, and for my sister, who was deployed overseas. We'd thought of it as a sweet accommodation, an almost invisible kindness that would let faraway love be in the room. I hadn't noticed that the tiny camera in the corner positioned to capture guests finding their seats and the musicians tuning angled back toward the hallway that led to the bridal suite. Now, on the 12-foot projection screen out in the ceremony space somewhere backstage, had become a room with a girl and a dress and a woman who should have known better. The angle wasn't perfect, the truth seldom is, but it was enough. A ripple of sound swelled from far away, gasps, murmurs, the strange chorus of disbelief that happens when people realize they're watching a story rewrite itself in real time. I turned my phone so that Margaret could see the screen. There we were, the smoky air, the shimmer of heat, the look on her face that would be branded into memory, no matter how many times she smoothed her hair and said this wasn't what it looked like. For Jason's grandparents, I explained, and for my sister who has slept on cots under loud skies and still texts me pictures of stray cats. It's been running for 20 minutes. We had captured the musicians untangling cables, the flower girl twirling in her itchy dress, the best man adjusting a tie he wasn't sure he deserved to wear. We had captured Margaret's voice, too bright and brittle, saying a sentence people would pretend not to discuss for years. The app lit up with comments I couldn't process yet. My heart beat against the screen as if it wanted out. Something inside Margaret's eyes flickered, then not quite fear, not yet, but the awareness that the version of events she could tolerate was slipping out of her hands. "Turn it off," she snapped, lunging toward me. I stepped back in my sensible shoes, the ones my mother said were too practical for a wedding day, and I insisted on anyway because I like to stand when I make a promise. Jessica, my maid of honor, moved with the quiet, decisive grace that once got all of us to graduation in the same dress code. Melody opened a window with a clatter. Tina grabbed the small trash can and smothered the last visible flicker. We looked like women in an instructional video for how to manage a crisis without breaking a nail. The door outside the ceremony space opened somewhere. I couldn't see it, but I could hear the shift in the room's sound, the way you can hear waves change when a boat cuts across them. Footsteps. Jason's best man running. And then another sound I knew as well as I knew my own breath, Jason. He does this little almost whistle when he's sprinting a soft pull of air, like his lungs are talking to keep pace. My phone buzzed with his name. Down the hall around the curve, his tuxedo flashed black between columns as he shouldered past a pair of stunned ushers and a cousin who would later try to pretend he didn't smile when he saw me in the borrowed veil. I thought about the first time I met Margaret. She took in my thrifted dress and my scuffed flats, and the way my hair was doing that stubborn wave thing it does in humidity, and she smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're plucky," she said, as if I were a stray who fetched. I remember feeling so young in that moment, so eager to be chosen by a world I had already proven I could survive without its approval. I told myself she'd come around. People always do when they see someone loving their son the right way, I thought. I was wrong. Some people don't come around. They circle. They tighten. The door burst open and Jason filled the space like oxygen. His face was a study in kinetic emotion, shock, anger, the kind of tenderness that makes words in the throat dissolve. He took in the ruined dress, the smears of ash on my calves, his mother's fingers still too close to a lighter that hadn't cooled. I loved him most in that instant. I think not because he was angry for me, but because he knew where to put his anger. He didn't ask me if I was sure or if we should calm down or if this was a misunderstanding. He looked at his mother and said very softly, "Tell me I didn't just watch you set fire to the woman I love." I had expected the part where I shook. Instead, I steadied. I realized I was not the person who had to prove anything anymore. The proof was crackling in the air, rising in threads of smoke. With my free hand, I reached for Jason's. His palm was warm, his grip was a yes. What I remember next is disjointed in the neat cinematic sense and perfect in the human one. The venue manager appeared in the doorway with eyes so round it would have been funny if it weren't my life. Guests shifted in their chairs outside like a sea of politeness, deciding whether it had permission to become outrage. A flower petal stuck to the toe of my shoe and rode with me like a tiny boat. In the far corner, a cheap plastic fan ticked as it oscillated, offering no help to anyone. The world contains so much ridiculousness even while it breaks. I told the coordinator we would proceed. The word surprised everyone, including me. Proceed. Not salvage, not postpone, not run. Proceed. There was a person I wanted to be, and she lived on the other side of that decision. Margaret tried to find the tones she used on charity boards and caterers who dared to suggest the menu might be improved by considering the budget. You can't possibly think she began and then stopped, because the screen behind the altar was still alive, and the people we loved were watching, and even her talent for rephrasing reality couldn't compete with evidence broadcast on a 12-foot canvas. Her son stood between us like a hinge that had finally learned to swing toward the right door. Jason's father arrived quieter than his wife in every way, but with a look in his eyes I had never seen pointed at her before. It was not hatred. He is not built for that. It was a line drawn cleanly with a carpenter's pencil. I said we would need 20 minutes. I said it the way you tell a client the truth about a timeline when you plan to do it in 15. For a second, I let myself mourn that I didn't have a plan yet, and then my mind began to gather objects, the way hands gather thread. Melody's contact at Cleveland Bride, with the sample dresses, and the shared love of coffee that had led to a saved number. Jason's father's driver, and his fondness for being given a mission. The seamstress hired for last-minute hems, who could make miracles happen with a handful of pins and a mouthful of curses that happened to sound like prayers. I thought about how many campaigns I had built out of disasters, about the way people lean forward not when things are perfect, but when they are human. I thought about what it means to love a person, a future your own hard-won self, and realized it has never once meant surrender. Someone took control of the stream and angled the camera toward the altar, then toward the doors that led to the gardens. I could hear the guests as a unit now rustling and settling, deciding to believe in us. I have never been more aware of an audience, and I have never been less interested in performing. I wanted to be true, not triumphant. In the mirror, I looked like a bride out of a storybook someone had accidentally dropped in a puddle, black smears on the edge of my wrist, a pale streak on my cheek where tears had made a clean line through powder. My hair pin curls softened into surrender. I looked not ruined, but altered. It felt exactly right. Marriage is not a theater. It is a weather system. The forecast had changed. We were still the shore. I thought of my mother, who raised me with quiet hands and a talent for remaking supper out of leftovers, holidays out of coupons, a life out of what remained when the leaving was done. I thought of my sister, who would watch later in a desert morning and text me, "I saw you stand." I thought of Jason as a boy, probably learning the shape of his mother's approval and mistaking it for love, and then learning better the day he told me he didn't want to become a man who measured women by the cost of their shoes. I thought of Margaret as a girl too, maybe before someone told her the world was a ladder and the only way to survive is to step on hands. And then I thought of now, of the door between rooms, of the aisle that is a measurement of breath, of the word proceed, which is just promise in motion. I told the camera we would be late by a little and right on time by a truer metric. "Thank you for your patience," I said to the grandparents, to my sister under a sun we couldn't see, to 100 guests who had come for a story about flowers and got a story about fire. Love finds a way even when someone tries to burn it down. The applause rose like wind under a kite. Jason squeezed my fingers and I squeezed back. I could feel the seam of my life shifting, not tearing. There is a difference. I have learned to love differences. 20 minutes, I told myself. 10 to retrieve the dress, 5 to pin it, 5 to breathe. But the real work has already been done. The real vow, in a way, had already been spoken, not with rings or in a minister's cadence, but with smoke in our lungs and a decision in our mouths. We will not let someone else's fear decide our future. Somewhere down the hall, the exit sign glowed, its calm red reassurance: this way out. I wasn't looking for a way out. I was looking for a way through. The flames on my wedding dress had barely been put out when the real fire began, the one inside me. It burned hot, quiet, and steady, filling the spaces Margaret thought she'd hollowed out. The ruined gown was only the surface. Underneath was a wound much deeper, carved from years of small humiliations, subtle barbs, and carefully disguised contempt. Jason's father insisted on escorting Margaret out of the bridal suite. She went unwillingly, her words sharp, her protests brittle, but the weight of witnesses left her powerless. Outside, whispers turned into waves, rolling through the crowd like distant thunder. A wedding dress can be replaced, but respect once lost is not so easily found. I stood in the emptying room, ash still clinging to my fingers, and let myself feel the weight of it. The laughter of my bridesmaids trying to lighten the moment, the sympathetic glances, the hushed voices, it all blurred. What stayed sharp was the realization that Margaret had not simply tried to ruin a dress. She had tried to ruin me, but she had failed. Within minutes, friends sprang into action. A call to the bridal shop, a favor pulled from a seamstress who owed my aunt a veil borrowed from a cousin. All of it came together like puzzle pieces I hadn't known were waiting. It wasn't the dress I had dreamed of walking down the aisle in, but it became something more, a testament that love, when chosen fiercely, cannot be burned away. Jason never left my side. His silence said everything. The disbelief at his mother's cruelty, the quiet promise that I was no longer alone in carrying it. When we finally stood together at the altar, my voice did not waver. If anything, it grew stronger with each vow. I wasn't promising only to love him. I was promising never again to let anyone else decide the shape of my life. And yet, as the ceremony ended and the applause thundered, I knew the story was not finished. Margaret's fire had scorched more than fabric. It had revealed truths long buried in the Wilson family, truths about control, inheritance, and secrets hidden beneath layers of respectability. I did not know then how much further I would have to go to protect what was mine. But I knew this: I had survived the flames, and I was ready for whatever would rise from the smoke. When the music faded and the guests spilled out into the garden with champagne flutes in hand, I caught sight of Margaret standing off to the side. Though Jason's father had tried to keep her away, she lingered on the edges of the celebration like a storm cloud that refused to drift. Her lips were pressed thin, her eyes scanning every detail, as if searching for cracks she could exploit. I wanted to ignore her. I wanted to let the glow of new vows shield me from her shadow. But something inside me refused to stay quiet. For too long I had bent to her disapproval, tolerated her subtle jabs, her quiet corrections, her constant reminders that I was never quite enough. Watching my dress burn had burned away the last of my silence. Later that evening, while Jason was thanking relatives and the band struck up its second set, I walked toward her. The grass was damp beneath my shoes, the fairy lights casting halos on the lawn. Margaret's gaze snapped to me, her expression caught somewhere between fury and triumph, as if she still believed she could win. "You shouldn't be here," I said softly, but my voice carried steel. "Not today. Not after what you did." Her chin lifted, that familiar air of superiority returning like a reflex. "You think this marriage will last?" she asked. "I was saving him from a mistake." A laugh escaped me, not the light kind, but the laugh of someone who has finally seen through every mask. "No. You were saving yourself from losing control." She flinched just barely, but enough. Jason's father appeared, then shoulders tense, his voice unusually firm. "Enough, Margaret. Everyone saw what you did. It ends here." But I knew it didn't end there. Not really, because in her eyes I saw something deeper than anger. I saw fear. Fear that I was stronger than she had ever imagined. Fear that I would uncover the rest of what she was hiding. The following weeks proved me right. Whispers reached me from cousins, from family friends who had seen Margaret's cruelty long before I had. Old stories resurfaced about how she manipulated Jason's choices, how she intercepted letters from colleges when he was younger, how she controlled finances with a grip so tight even Jason's father couldn't move without her permission. And then one evening, as Jason and I unpacked wedding gifts in our small apartment, a call came from his aunt. Her voice trembled as she said, "There are things you don't know. About your mother. About money that was never hers to spend." Jason's hand tightened around mine. Betrayal, it seemed, was not finished with us yet. But I was no longer the girl who let her dress burn while standing frozen. I was a wife now, a partner, a woman who had faced fire and walked through it. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty: if Margaret thought she had destroyed me, she had only prepared me. The real battle had just begun. The box arrived 3 days later, left on our doorstep without a return address. Jason carried it inside, brow furrowed, and we set it on the kitchen table between stacks of unopened gifts. The cardboard was worn, its tape peeling at the edges. Something about it felt secret, the way hidden things do when they finally decide to come into the light. Inside were folders, dozens of them neatly labeled in Margaret's precise handwriting. Bank statements, property deeds, letters. At first glance, it looked like ordinary record-keeping, but as Jason flipped through the pages, his face hardened. "These are Dad's accounts," he said slowly. "Some of them from before I was even born." "Why would Mom have these?" I reached for one of the envelopes tucked in the back. Inside was a faded letter signed in Jason's grandmother's hand. It detailed a trust fund left for Jason, meant to secure his education and his future. But the balance on the attached documents told a different story. The money was gone, moved, siphoned away over years. Jason's voice cracked. "She took it. She took everything that was supposed to be mine." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air pressing in. I thought of the way Margaret had tried to stop our marriage, the way she burned my dress without hesitation. It wasn't just about disapproval, it was about control, about silencing me before I could stand beside Jason and see the truth. Over the next week, we pieced the story together. Margaret had managed the family finances with an iron grip. Jason's father, worn down by years of her domineering ways, had looked the other way too many times. No one questioned her because she was meticulous, charming in public, ruthless in private. And in that ruthlessness, she had redirected funds that didn't belong to her. It wasn't just the trust fund. There were assets in Jason's name sold without his knowledge. Investments liquidated, even donations to charities that had never existed, their addresses leading back to shell accounts. Jason's hands shook as he read. She's been betraying us for decades. I remembered the fire on my dress, the cold smile on her lips. Suddenly, it all made sense. My marriage threatened the empire she had built out of lies. With me at Jason's side, her control would crumble. That was why she tried to destroy me. We sat in silence, the weight of discovery settling heavy. Then Jason looked at me with eyes full of resolve I had never seen before. "We can't let this go. She needs to answer for this." I nodded. My heart ached for him, for the boy who had grown up believing his mother was simply overprotective, not deceitful, for the man now realizing his own blood had stolen his future. The decision came quietly, like the closing of a door. We would confront her. Not with anger this time, but with proof, and not in the shadows of a bridal suite, but in the full light of family and truth. The confrontation was inevitable, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. Margaret was clever, she would twist, deflect, accuse, but for the first time Jason wasn't standing alone. He had me. And together, we would not just survive her fire, we would burn down her lies. The confrontation happened on a Sunday afternoon in the very house Jason had grown up in. The walls still smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books, but to me, it felt like walking into an arena. Jason's father sat in the living room with his head bowed, the lines on his face deeper than I remembered. Margaret stood by the fireplace, arms folded, her chin high, as if daring anyone to challenge her authority. Jason laid the folders on the coffee table. The papers spilled out evidence in black and white: transfers, forged signatures, the trust fund drained to nothing. For a moment, the only sound was the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. "What is this supposed to be?" Margaret asked, her voice sharp, but too controlled, the voice of someone who knew denial was her last weapon. "It's the truth," Jason said. His voice was steady, though I could feel the tremor in his hand where it brushed against mine. "You've been stealing from me, from Dad, from everyone." Her laugh was brittle, the kind that cracks under pressure. "Don't be ridiculous. Those are just old records. You don't understand how these things work." But Jason pressed on. "I understand perfectly. Grandma left money for me. Money you siphoned away. I understand you sold assets in my name. I understand you've been manipulating Dad and the rest of this family for years." Jason's father finally raised his eyes. They were clouded with sorrow, but also with something new: anger. "Is it true, Margaret?" he asked softly. "Tell me it isn't true." For a moment I almost thought she would crumble, but Margaret's pride was made of steel. She straightened her shoulders and spat, "Everything I did for this family, for Jason, for you. You'd all be nothing without me." The words hung heavy, poisonous, but also revealing, because beneath the anger was her confession. Jason's father stood, his frame trembling. "No, Margaret. We are nothing because of you. Look what you've done to us." His voice cracked, years of silence finally breaking. Margaret's eyes darted between us, desperate for control. "You brought her into this family?" she hissed, glaring at me. "She turned you against me. She doesn't belong here." I met her gaze and felt no fear. "I didn't burn the dress, Margaret. You did. I didn't steal the money. You did. The only person tearing this family apart is you." The room fell silent. Even the clock seemed to pause. Jason closed the folders and pushed them toward his father. "This doesn't end here. The board needs to see this. The lawyers too. You can't hide anymore." Margaret's face drained of color. For the first time, she looked small. Not the towering figure who had tried to break me, but a woman trapped by the weight of her own lies. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. No words came. Jason took my hand, and together we walked out, leaving the smell of smoke and betrayal behind us. Outside, the air was crisp, the sky wide and clear. Jason let out a shaky breath. "We did it," he whispered, though his voice was heavy with grief. I squeezed his hand. "This is just the beginning, but we're not alone anymore." Because the truth was out now. And truth, once spoken, has a way of burning brighter than any fire meant to silence it. The fallout was swift, louder than I could have imagined. Within a week, whispers became open conversations, and open conversations became scandal. Jason's father, quiet for so long, finally summoned the courage to meet with the family's lawyers. The evidence was undeniable: accounts drained, assets misused, signatures forged. Margaret's empire of manipulation collapsed under the weight of her own handwriting. The family board called an emergency meeting. I sat beside Jason, our hands clasped tightly under the long oak table where decisions that shaped lives had been made for decades. The room was tense, filled with relatives, advisors, and family friends who had invested not just money, but trust in the Wilson legacy. Margaret entered last, her hair perfectly styled, her pearl necklace shining like armor. She still carried herself with the air of command, but the eyes around the table no longer bent to her will. They judged, they measured, they remembered. Jason's father cleared his throat, his voice trembling but resolute. We've discovered a series of financial misdeeds carried out over years. Misdeeds that have harmed not only Jason, but the stability of this family's future. Margaret laughed, brittle and hollow. This is absurd. You're all willing to believe her. She jabbed a finger toward me. A girl who doesn't belong in this family. She poisoned you against me. Jason's voice cut through, steady and sharp. No, Mom. You did this. You betrayed us long before she walked through that door. He laid the folders on the table again, pages fanning out like accusations. Every eye scanned them. Every eye saw the truth. One by one, the board members spoke. Words like irresponsible, dishonorable, criminal filled the air. Margaret's mask cracked further with each syllable. Finally, the chairman of the board, Jason's uncle, delivered the words she could not escape. Effective immediately, Margaret Wilson is removed from all financial authority in this family's estate. Margaret's face drained of color. For the first time, she looked truly powerless. She opened her mouth, but no defense came. Her carefully woven world had unraveled thread by thread until nothing remained but ashes. Jason's father signed the papers that severed her control. When he finished, he looked at Jason with eyes full of regret and whispered, "I should have stopped her years ago." Jason gripped his father's hand. "It's not too late to start doing what's right." We left that room not as victims, but as survivors. As we stepped into the crisp evening air, Jason turned to me, his voice quiet. "She tried to destroy you, and in the end, she destroyed herself." I thought of my burned wedding dress, of Margaret's cold smile, of the smoke curling in the air that day. She had wanted to break me, to keep me from standing at the altar, from becoming his wife, from seeing the truth. But all she had done was ignite a fire that revealed everything she had tried to bury. As I looked at Jason, I realized that betrayal had given us something stronger than we had before: clarity, unity, and the courage to protect what was ours. And when I whispered my final vow to him that night, it wasn't in front of a minister or a crowd. It was in the quiet of our home. No matter what comes, we will never let someone else write our story. Because we had survived the flames, and we would rise from the smoke stronger than ever. Please, like this video if it resonated with you, share it with someone who has faced betrayal, and subscribe for more stories that uncover the strength hidden in pain. Leave me a comment. I'd love to hear how you've turned your own heartbreak into power.